I'd like to begin with a poem from James Autry that I think sets a tone for today. Sometimes you just connect like that, no big thing maybe, but something beyond the usual business stuff. It comes and goes quickly, so you have to pay attention. A change in the eyes when you ask about the family, a pain flickering behind the statistics about a boy or a girl in school, or about seeing them every other Sunday. An older guy talks about his bride, a little affectation after 25 years. A hot eye achiever laughs before you want him to. Someone talks about his wife's job or why she quit working to stay home. An older joker needs another laugh on the way to retirement. A woman says she spends a lot of her salary on a babysitter, and a good one is hard to find, but it's worth it because nothing's more important than the baby. Listen, listen. In every office and workplace and community, you hear the threads of love and joy, fear and guilt, the cries for celebration, reassurance, and somehow you know that connecting those threads is what you're supposed to do, and business takes care of itself. Somehow you know that connecting the threads is what you're supposed to do, and business takes care of itself. The role of a leader today, and this is very important, the role of a leader today is to call people from different perspectives together for a greater good. To call different people from different perspectives together for a greater good. If you're only talking to people who believe the same things that you do, if you only talk to people who like what you have to say, you're not a leader. You're a member of a sorority or fraternity. Leadership is calling people from different perspectives, and that's what's really amazing about servant leadership. It's not partisan. It's not any one particular religious denomination. It pulls together the threads of the community where everyone can participate because everyone can serve and everyone can lead. Here's what's really extraordinary in America today. Things are getting better. We have less people living in poverty. Our educational system, more people are graduating from high school. Our water and our air quality are getting better. Look at the production of our land and our farmers and what they're doing. Think about in terms of our levels of technology. And if you begin to study these things, everything is improving. But there's one part of our lives that we're experiencing a deficit, and it's community. It was exacerbated by the pandemic in terms of isolation or alienation. So our task now is to kind of come back together. And how do we bring people back together? To appreciate each other's gifts and differences. To recognize that everyone has burdens, but everyone has strengths. And that's what Greenleaf recognized back in the 1970s when he said this: the best test for a servant leader, because of your leadership and your organization and your community, do people become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants and leaders? And here's the moral imperative. And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Now think about it for just a moment in all of our communities. As we have rising gas prices, rates of inflation, who are we concerned about? The people who don't have the extra discretionary income for food or for gas or for the basic necessities in life. And that's what happens in terms of servant leadership. How is it that we serve everyone within the community? I am so happy to see so many of you who are here today in uniform. Thank you for your service. You are public servants. Each and every day, from an early time in your life, you decided that you wanted to serve the common good. You don't only serve the people that you like. In fact, oftentimes you end up serving people that might not like you. But you do it with dignity and respect in order to bring people together. And this is the nature of community. Now, Robert Putnam at Harvard said there's two kinds of ways in which we build social capital, or those connections. One is bonding, by the ways when we talk to and with the people that we know, but out of that bonding comes bridging. So we build strong relationships with the people that we know, our families, our friends, our neighborhoods, our churches, our nonprofits, our organizations, but then we have to bridge out. How do we take what we've experienced and make sure that we commit ourselves to the greater good? And so those are the themes that we'll be talking about here today. Deanna?
Wow.
Well, now, Tom, that's nice philosophical, and I'm in that school. But how in a community, I mean, how do we do that? How does that look like? What does it look like? Deanna, you got any thoughts about that?
I think that when I think about community and in a practical sense and what it means with leadership right now today, to me it goes so hand in hand with healing. And that's what our community really needs right now is a whole lot of healing and leaders that are able to bring us together so that we can heal together. So that's to me it feels really big. I have 3 boys at home. My oldest is 16, and he just broke up with his girlfriend after 6 months, and he has been heartbroken all weekend long. But we just had a really long conversation over the weekend about when you bring people together, people are different. We're humans. We're flawed. We have different ideas. We have different beliefs. Anybody who experiences the same thing is going to experience it in a different way. And because community is built on people and we are all so different, there's going to need to be a whole lot of healing for us to build community together. So those things in my mind all resonate very, very closely together, and something that in the leadership and the people that I'm talking to these days, that idea, that feeling of good leaders being able to bring people together to heal together really resonates with me.
What we do each day, how we walk, how we talk, and courtesy is, kind of common sense. We've in some way been taught that by somebody. Just that simple act is a big deal. There are people that walk down the street that nobody's talked to today. Somebody walks down the hallways. Nobody's ever said hello to them. They have something on their mind. Just to break the mood that they're in and say, good morning, good afternoon. I do it with everybody as long as I can get their eye contact. They apparently don't have something in their ear they're listening to. But sometimes I even get their eye and I wave at them when they're in that condition. I got a better word than that. So it works. You don't know, and it doesn't have to be verbal. And I have an example that, if this seems right, I'll share it with you. That it does profound, and it's not verbal.
Let's look at what's taking place in Ukraine. The refugees leaving Ukraine, and one of the towns on the border in Poland took in a town of 60,000, took in 60,000 refugees in one day. In La Crosse, we have 290 people that are unsheltered, and we're having a hard time getting ourselves to come together. A town of 60,000, and there's 290 people that we find to get unsheltered, and yet Poland took in 60,000 people in one day. The real sense in terms of community. What do you do for the least privileged? How do you take care of the refugee? That's kind of we saw that happen. It is possible. Give you another example. Ultra Credit Union in La Crosse. One day in October every year when the credit union is closed down, they have 333 employees, and they send them out into the schools and the community to do whatever kind of service that needs to be done. Humane Society, teaching kids financial literacy in the high school, working at food pantries, community gardens, wherever people need help. So what do they understand is that their wealth comes from the community. Therefore, they have a responsibility to serve the community from where that wealth comes. That level of mutuality that takes place. And that's what happens. There's the difference right now between service and mutuality. I mean, service and help. When if I come to help you, Bernie, oftentimes I remain in control. I'm going to help you. I'm going to fix you. Service is a level of mutuality that you have something to teach me in the process. There's a level of mutuality, and that's what Greenleaf really believed, that when we serve other people, we are also in the process of opening ourselves up to being served as well. Haven't you had that experience? Haven't you gone to a food pantry and served dinner and you come away with an immense sense of gratitude? Like you received more than you gave that night? And you begin to recognize that this is what happens within a community when we understand that our mutuality and responsibility for the good of each other.
I love that. And from a perspective of working in an environment and being a servant leader in an environment where you have team members, people that depend on you, it's that same mutuality, right? It's walking in every day and saying, what do you need from me to do your job well? And it's not a matter of taking and taking, but what can I give you so that we as a team can thrive, so that we as a community, because that's what a team is a community, can thrive and can better serve those stakeholders that depend on us to do our job every single day.
One of the top criteria of servant leadership is listening. And, listening to understand. You don't have to say anything. Just ask the question or just listen. And you're going to have a very nice example of that here with one of your speakers. But there was a lady that came up to me at MSOE a couple of years ago, and she said, I came here just to thank you. I don't recall ever meeting her. She said, years ago, you sent us off to the Drucker Foundation. All of these people were exceptionally good leaders of nonprofits. And she said, you changed my life. Thank you. So I didn't do much of anything. I never met her. An employee of ours, something years ago, I listened and must have said something, but he regularly talks about, you saved my marriage. And I know in these situations, I don't do anything other than ask some questions. Not questions with conclusions, but questions that cause the person that's speaking to illuminate what they're thinking about. And they don't necessarily have the answer, but they go home and they do other things and they start processing in a way that you didn't. In a small town, I'll give you a third example. In a small town, a little island off Savannah, I was meeting somebody, and it's really a small town. So I was looking for a breakfast place that morning. There was only one in town. So I walked from my motel to there, and I did this, I think, 2 or 3 mornings at a time. 2 or 3 mornings. And the people there would not say hello, but I said hello to everybody walking down the street. I was just having a good time doing one of my experiments. And they kind of grunted or, that kind of they weren't accustomed to saying hello, is the example I would give you. Not unusual. Some towns are very much that way. I was in Charleston and I did some of that, and that's a distinctive difference. So the second day I did it, and by golly, probably a lot of them were the same people, and they start saying, hello, good morning, how are you? And then the third morning, just about everybody on the street said that. I've done that in 2 little towns, and it works. Expect nothing. That's very important. Just because of what you do, expect nothing, as long as your heart's in the right place. The heart and the head are connected. They both have a set of neurons. They interact. You've seen people whose heart and head are not working so good. And I had one in our church, and it was, I saw her one perfectly tall, straight, elegant woman. And then she got a divorce. And then her children were taken away. And then she tried suicide twice in the church. Her body, physical body, was going like that, and she walked around like this. So don't underestimate. Just don't expect anything. At least I don't. I try not to.
What I've come to understand is this: if I'm not practicing servant leadership at home, don't expect me to practice it in the workplace. This is a philosophy. This is a way of life that doesn't make that level of distinction. So let's talk about our homes. Families are primary communities, the families that we grew up in. And so our responsibility as spouses, as parents, our responsibility to our siblings. Now, this last weekend, I'm teaching a class on rituals and celebration. Every servant leader is a ritual leader. So you look in terms of the rituals in your organization, the rituals in your community. This week, we're going to have the ritual of Easter. Others are celebrating Ramadan right now. Others are celebrating Passover. So these rituals and celebrations give us our identity. So I had this gentleman come up who's a coach. And he said, my son is 8 months old, and this is his favorite book. Our ritual every night is I read this book to him every night. And it's his most precious love story. And he says, I told myself I was going to do this. And he started crying. Well, we had 4 other men who are there as fathers and husbands. And they each got up. And they each, I wasn't going to do this. Because they realized that the children entrusted to their care are as in need of the service and leadership as the people that they work with in their organizations or their institutions. That's the nature of community. And for those children who do not have parents who are able to care for them in that way, then the secondary community, which means all of us, have a responsibility to our children. Tony Dungy, in a marvelous book, The Mentor Leader. Tony Dungy, Football Night in America, had brought the Colts to the Super Bowl. Tony Dungy said this: the most significant work that an American adult can do today is to be significantly involved in the life of a child. Is that not true? Every child needs 5 adults other than their parents who care about them. Are we one of those 5? Are we open to that possibility? So you begin to recognize that the servant leadership stuff isn't something that's left for executives. Oftentimes when we talk about leadership, we're talking about bossship. Who's the boss? And I'm here to tell you we're all citizens, and therefore we all have responsibility to serve. One last thing, since I'm on my soapbox, let me just say this. A marvelous book to read is called On the Declaration, written by Diane Allen, who is the head of an ethics institute at Harvard. And what she teaches in her class is just read the Declaration of Independence. They just read and study no partisan politics. They just read the words of our founders and how the country was founded. And here's the last line. With a belief in divine providence, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred trust. Isn't that amazing? The pledge that those founders made to give their lives, their fortunes, and a trust, which is the foundation of all community. And that's what we're built on. Well, servant leadership restores trust because we believe in the power of relationships.
It's beautiful. I think I was actually just at a conference last week. It was with a bunch of educators. It was amazing. It was the littles, the pre-K, all the way up to higher ed, and all the educators in between together. And there was a word that I kept hearing in the different sessions that I attended, and that was love. And it was a word that you don't, I wish that we heard it more often when it comes to leadership, because I really think it ties back to being a member of a family and a community and what you do at home and what that means and what your family means to you. And then bringing that same heart, that same leadership model into whatever other workplace or other communities that you have around you. And that it's okay to do that. And that, to me, that servant leadership is really bringing that love wherever you are and being true to who you are and not showing up for work being one kind of leader and showing up at home being a different kind of leader. To me, that's how I try my very darndest to live my life.
This is a 40-year journey with a family. One member of the family, the youngest, I met him when he's about 4 years old, and he tapped me on the shoulder in the back seat of the car. Mr. Pieper, will you be my dad? And I said, no, I can't be your dad, but I can be your friend. And that evolved. And years later, when he's early 20s, he tells me this story. He says, I had this, now he's managing a good-sized restaurant, a chain thing. And he said they had a particular incident, and the boss knew about it. And until a patron brought it up, they did something about it. So then the boss said, I'd like you to run the restaurant. And he said, I can't run a restaurant for you because of what he did. But he said the way he runs a restaurant is he never tells the people what to do. He says to them, what is your solution? And he causes them to think. That's what you do when you ask a question and listening. And I said, where'd you ever get that? And he says, well, you remember when you used to ride around with a car, my friend? This is a guy that's self-image is so low, I have never been with him singularly until he's 20, mid-20s. He said, well, you never had the radio on. We'd go to museums and here and there, and you'd talk. And that's where I got it from. I don't remember talking about anything like that. But that's what he got. Today, and his journey included, his mother could never give him a positive comment. I practiced with her. Couldn't do it. He could do better. Dropped out of school, joined a gang because the gang gave him a t-shirt. His mother never gave him any praise, I'm thinking. So he joined the gang, and once you're in the gang, you can't get out. You get out, they shoot you. That's the way it works. And he ended up in jail twice, couldn't stand jail. He said, I have images that come back. The boss of the gang walked up behind somebody, put a gun to his head and blew his brains out. It spattered all over the room. He said, every couple of years, I have to go to somebody professionally to help me work through that again because it keeps coming up. Another one, they thought they squealed on the gang, and he didn't. They shot him. That gang is now down to 1 or 2 people. He left town to go to Washington, D.C. because he couldn't get away from them. So you don't know how you affect people. Expect nothing. I was completely mind-boggled with this whole family because everything I knew how to do didn't work. But there's some neat stories. With that, we're going to take a couple of minute break. We talked about love. There was a sheet out there, not enough for all of you, but you can take a picture of it. And it talks about, I think it's 7 different kinds of love. None of them are LOVE.
Well, good morning. And again, thank you so very much for taking time out of your day, recognizing that your time is your most valuable asset. Those of you who left the workplace today to come to this meeting, no one else is responding to your emails. Nobody else is responding to your voicemails. By coming to this presentation today, you've just lengthened your workday or work week. People's time is so valuable, and we want to honor your time. I'd like to begin with a piece that I go back to over and over again, written by Thomas Friedman in a book called Thank You for Being Late. It's an optimist's guide to the age of disruption, and this was written before the pandemic. And he says this, it might be one of the most important things we say here today. He writes, all of us must learn to live in the eye of the hurricane. What's in the eye of the hurricane? Calm, still, quiet. And he writes this, the eye of the hurricane moves along with the storm. It draws energy from it while creating a sanctuary of stability inside. It is both dynamic and stable, and so must we be. We cannot escape these accelerations. We have to dive into them, take advantage of their energy and flows where possible, move with them, use them to learn faster, design smarter, and collaborate deeper, all so we can build our own eyes to anchor and propel ourselves and our families confidently forward. The closest analog for the eye of the hurricane I can think of is a healthy community. When people feel embedded in a community, they feel protected, respected, and connected. And that feeling is more important than ever because when people feel protected, respected, and connected in a healthy community, it generates enormous trust. And when there's more trust in a room, people are much more likely to grow. When people trust each other, they can be much more adaptable and open to all forms of pluralism. When people trust each other, they think long term. When there's trust in the room, people are more inclined to collaborate and to experiment, to open themselves up to others, to new ideas and novel approaches, and to extending the golden rule. They don't waste energy investigating every mistake. They feel free to fail and try again, fail and try again. Collaboration moves at the speed of trust. The secret sauce in our communities, in our democracies, trust. You can't mandate it. You can't legislate it. We earn it. One of the things I've learned over Zoom, I was a boomer who became a Zoomer for 2 years. And a marvelous technology. We can share all kinds of ideas and information, but trust is built face to face. And that's why we chose today community building built on trust.
When I was invited to do this, I wanted to bring together both personal and educational experiences because I've seen servant leadership play out in both of those things. And today, one of the examples I'm going to use is my mother. And one of the great things about this is her birthday. So that's a very good topic and a great way to honor her while I'm here today. So servant leaders, you asked for a reminder of what does this mean? How do we turn this into practice? What does this look like? And so in the big picture, servant leadership is about creating a culture so others can realize their full potential. How do we do that? What does that look like? And that's something that we can do in our personal lives, our professional lives, in any way that we engage. We can do that by serving others. We can do that by providing resources and support. We can do that by removing obstacles. And that removing obstacles, that providing resources, that providing support, that's one of those through threads that help us think about how are we not only practicing this, but making sure that we're not disenfranchising others as we move through this. Who benefits when and why is a great way to think about what we do and why we do it. Some other ways that we can practice servant leadership: by empowering others. Sometimes delegating work can be empowering others. Sometimes coaching people can be empowering others, helping them realize what they are capable of, not just doing what you want them to do. Demonstrating humility and empathy, and I'll come back to this because humility and empathy are so important. Empathy especially. Empathy is not endorsement. There's a TED Talk out there that talks about engaging with people who we strongly disagree with, who may have said negative things to us, but trying to understand their perspective and learning from them. That can humanize that experience. It's difficult. It is not easy. It can be emotional. It can be draining, but it's important. And demonstrating ethical leadership, character, and stewardship. If you remember when you walked in, you saw a poster that had different things that were describing the elements of servant leadership. Today, we've heard that servant leadership is about community. It's about listening. There's a great book called Listen Very Loud, and that book I love. It's about student affairs, because that's my background before I ended up in academic affairs. And the book, it may sound very strange. Listen very loud. How do you listen very loud? What does that mean? The book talks about how this father was in the car with his child, and the child was talking, and the father said, "I'm listening." But the child said, "You're not listening very loud." So his entire book is reflecting on what does it mean to listen very loud? To listen very loud, we're listening not to respond, but to understand. And that's something that we heard today. So you can find servant leadership in so many different situations. So let me go back to my mother. My mother didn't have a high school education. I was the first in my family to go to college, first in my family to earn a PhD. But what I learned from my mother was how to treat others, how to engage with them. If I'm expecting something from them, I am there with them, no matter if it is something vacuuming the entrepreneurial space at MSOE, because it needs done. And we want to show students that we care about our environment. Or, as I will probably do this weekend, picking up a shift at Groman Tower because the students want their time off and I'm going to be there anyway. So I'm helping them not have to be there, providing that space for them to relax, to recharge. Those are things that I learned from my mother. Now, growing up, I saw them and I'm just like, why is she always busy? Why is she always this? But now I realize she was always busy because she was always serving others. And here I stand today in much the same way. I probably am busy 7 days a week, much to most people's surprise. But that's because I enjoy what I do. When I'm not working on the grant with Deanna and our colleagues across the nation, I am engaging with students in a very informal way in Groman Tower. Being present helped me build that relationship. It wasn't forced. It was very natural. Now I do a Sunday breakfast for them, so I bring in donuts and muffins and bananas, and that's something the students can look forward to. Now, it's a big building. It has a couple hundred people in it, but I have the ability to provide that little sense of community to them, that little sense of food security. Because sometimes we think about college students and we think, well, they're paying to be there. They have to have money, but they don't. So those are things that I learned from my mom. Providing for others when you can. And I think that that is a key piece of servant leadership. And it's not making sure that every person who takes a donut or takes a banana is that person who needs it, because maybe need looks different. And that's where empathy comes in. It doesn't matter if they have a refrigerator full of food, because they may be down there to get that food because they see others, because they build community. We dressed one of our workers at Groman Tower up as a unicorn one Friday night. And it sounds insane, but it worked. One of the students came in, saw Keller dressed as a unicorn, immediately went up to his room, dressed as a Teletubby, and came back down. And so now we have a unicorn and a Teletubby standing in the lobby of Groman Tower, talking about engineering. Because that makes perfect sense. But that's community. And so those things are really important. We need to provide that space. And that's some of the ways that we can do it. So empathy, empowerment, and displaying that character so that others can learn from you, that's really important in servant leadership. Good? Thanks, Laura.
Thank you for having me. First, I want to give a little disclaimer. My subtitle here says an unexpected key to COVID survival, and I don't intend that to be flippant. I know many of us have lost loved ones in the pandemic, but in the context of my story, I'll be sharing a different type of survival. I have loved ones whose careers, marriages, and well-being did not survive COVID. So it's in this context that I use the term COVID survival. So I was, Dick approached me asking, what has servant leadership done for you? Can you tell us a story? So that's what I'm going to do today. My first introduction to servant leadership was my first job out of college in a publishing company, working customer service in the 90s. So we're talking like headsets, those big computers, memorized zip codes and credit card prefixes. I was in a huge room of cubicles with one cubicle in the middle that was elevated above the rest to look over the partitions. That kind of environment. There was a door at the end of the big room, and that's the office where the boss was. So my first day on the job, the boss invited me into the office and explained to me that her job was to support me in my job, and she called it servant leadership. I thought that sounded pretty nice. But then I went to work, and I didn't see her again until over a year later when payroll made a mistake and gave me a double bonus. One added to my paycheck and one in a separate paycheck, or like a separate check. So she called me into the office to explain the mistake and to let me know that my next 3 months of paychecks would have little deductions until I paid back the extra bonus. Well, it didn't feel very good. Definitely did not seem like someone who was committed to supporting me in my job. Fast forward 15 years after I had the privilege of being a stay-at-home mom. This time I re-entered the workforce while simultaneously working on my master's. In a few months, I inherited a department that worked top down. The previous director was an expert at what she did, and she clearly directed the people in her department to perform specific tasks, reporting back to her on a regular basis. And I'm going to take a moment to back up and explain what department this is. It's the Department of Residence Life. So it's tasked with providing quality, caring residential community for students to support their academic goals and personal development. At that time, the department was made up of 38 RAs and 4 full-time RDs. And I was asked to just fill in as an interim director for a few months. So I walked into the room full of RDs, and I said, my job is to support you in your job. And I heard my boss from the 90s, and I just felt like an imposter, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I drew on what I remembered feeling. I wanted a boss to ask me how I was doing, what excited me about my work, and where I felt disappointment. I knew I couldn't offer this specific task or this staff any specific expertise like my predecessor. So I relied on them to tell me what they needed. And so that's an interesting thing about being an interim anything. Your job pretty much is to just make sure things don't fall apart in the in-between, right? So I stepped into that role honestly just wanting to know what the staff needed to be successful. I listened and I just tried to find a way to deliver. My desire to see them succeed motivated me because I cared about them. Before being named the interim director, I was the administrative assistant for the department. So I had connections and I understood the operational systems. And I observed how these RDs were very literally managed. And my empathy for their situation drove me to genuinely care for them as individuals. I wanted to see them succeed. So good for me, right? My heart was in the right place. Greenleaf says that a servant leader is servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve. It begins with a natural feeling. My desire to serve was a good place to start, but I knew I wouldn't serve well if I couldn't figure out a way to lead well. By then, I was well into grad classes, but still didn't feel like I had an expert knowledge to take me to a place of confidence. All the same, since the department didn't fall apart, the RDs responded well to me, and complaints went from multiple complaints going to the president's office a day to 0, I was offered the full-time job. I accepted and prayed for guidance to find what I was missing. Up to that point, I had felt like I was just adding an empathetic human side to a well-designed collection of policies and structure. That resulted in a sense of kindness and less transactional and more relationally focused. So things were feeling better for my team and for the students, but I was starting to run out of things to soften or edit. My interim strategy was coming to an end. And it was about that time that I was invited to a servant leadership roundtable and officially introduced to the real concepts and theoretical framework of servant leadership. It was in these monthly meetings that my curiosity was sparked, my library expanded, and I had a roadmap to give me the confidence to serve while leading a talented group of young professionals. I restructured my weekly department meetings to spend the first 15 minutes on an aspect of servant leadership, forcing me to constantly learn and share. In my industry, in higher ed housing, the life cycle of a professional staff is ever evolving. Resident directors serve like 1 to 3 years and move on. It's the nature of a high demanding live-in entry-level professional job. It's one of those stepping stone positions that sets the groundwork for a variety of other higher ed roles. So, 5 years into my servant leadership journey of learning and sharing, I had a multi-generational, strong professional team of resident directors who applied these principles daily. I was not the expert managing specific details. I was part of a mutually supportive team that leaned on each other and learned from each other. We practiced good listening. We worked on cultivating foresight and challenged ourselves with growing awareness. Our structure allowed for continued growth in numbers. Now we had 60 RAs and 5 professional hall directors, and we did not lose that personal touch. But then COVID hit. And I know we each have our own COVID stories. On the home front, mine included navigating care for a high school exchange student we were hosting while his family in Spain suffered extenuating circumstances. I had 2 daughters away at school, one in California and one in Texas. And you remember what travel was like when the country shut down? Those cross-country road trips were challenging. And one of my daughters was in a car accident during her cross-country road trip, when businesses and service centers and insurance companies were not operating as normal. On top of that, I was the last elective surgery at my local hospital before they shut down. So I was recovering from knee surgery without PT, because after all, that was not considered essential. I was trying to be a mom and navigating the chaos on campus. Our college students were in the middle of spring break and told not to return except to remove their belongings. We had students stuck all over the country, people afraid, international students who couldn't get home, domestic students facing housing insecurity, and too many unknowns. But I had a staff of servant leaders who lived on campus and knew how to care well for each other and for me. They did not ask permission to create a solution for food needs for stranded international students. They just created solutions and told me what they would need for support to continue. They checked in on each other. They checked in on me. We took turns encouraging each other. We redistributed responsibilities, mapping out what made sense for the live-in people and what made sense for remote workers to take on. Observing the distress that some of our stranded students were experiencing, the RDs expanded well-being programs and all sorts of resources into the living spaces to reach those students. They did it in a way that was safe. Their ability to pivot according to need was possible because they had the freedom to serve well. Rather than waiting for an expert to give instruction, they served from a space of knowledge, and that's what servant leadership fosters. I can't imagine how I would have survived my marriage, our family. I can't imagine how our students would have been cared for if it were about me and my expert knowledge. When a resident explained she didn't have a home to go to and her on-campus job was suspended and she didn't know how to pay for food, the RD was empowered to fearlessly find solutions. And I say fearlessly because I know what it's like to be in a work environment where you second-guess yourself and your decision-making ability, not knowing if you'll have support and resources to do your job well. My team was not paralyzed by self-preserving fear. They were motivated and freed to serve well. The COVID crisis helped me realize that there's freedom in the servant leadership model, and that freedom is incredibly valuable. My department would have crumbled, and the students would not have been cared for if top-down expert knowledge was required to accomplish anything during those first and most intense weeks of COVID. And the surprising gift to me was that the gift of freedom was returned to me. My team cared about my personal and family situations, and they reminded me that my recovery and my family needed to take priority. So I was blessed because I practiced servant leadership, and I hope that you have those experiences too. And, it started off with me just taking some examples that we did in our servant leadership roundtable discussion. And the way that works is we have a wonderful team of people out of our SELT office on campus that would come up with a quote that we were going to read together and just discuss. And I realized, well, my staff doesn't have the same kind of experience that the Wisdom in the Room provided in the Servant Leadership Roundtable, so I needed to bring something else to it. So what I did was honestly just started Googling. And I found maybe an inspirational video. And then later on, as I went about, I found more and more companies that embraced servant leadership and had different ways of showing how they use servant leadership. And so I would bring in little excerpts. At one point, there was like the parliament from a particular country that showed how they incorporated foresight into their strategic plan. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I wanted to give my team, because like I said, that was stepping stone positions. I wanted to get into different industries, whether it's healthcare, government, education. So I would look for ways that I saw pieces of servant leadership, any of those aspects being used, and I would bring an example, and then we would talk about it and talk about where do you think you might be able to use this in the future, and what can you do to practice that now? They have a safe place to fail, first of all, and they get to experiment with ideas. When I had said they were empowered to like find solutions, that's part of it. I think they know the students better than I do. They're closer to it. And so when they know that I trust them and I've hired them, not because, we hire people, I think, because of their character and because of, what we see as possibilities and some of that intrinsic motivation. I don't hire people for a specific skill set necessarily, because I can teach a skill. So when they believe that, I think that helps entirely, and it gives them that feeling of like they don't have to second guess. I'm not going to come down on them and hold something over their head, like on some kind of a disciplinary suspension until you can get this right. That instead there's a feeling of support and a safe place to experiment.
To me, you bring young people in through modeling, and the two of you are exemplars of modeling what it means to serve. And I think that is very impactful. I see it very clearly in both of you.
I think something else we get to do, and I know that I'm in a position that allows me to do this, but when I get a chance to explain an idea to them, like stewardship, there's such a thing as stewardship of power. You don't think of stewardship in that way, but we start using language from servant leadership and then identifying it and naming it when we see that behavior. And I think that empowers them too. And it's like, you are such a strong servant leader. Look at the empathy you showed in this situation. You start using some of that language, and I think that helps.
And I think that empathy is really important. I've taught classes on global conversations and dialogue on diversity, and empathy is really important. And I think it goes back to a lot of what Jim was saying. When you're sitting in a room and he's in the interrogation, that empathy is so important. And we shouldn't confuse empathy with sympathy. We shouldn't confuse empathy with endorsement. Empathy is understanding your bias, checking yourself at the door, and then listening to the other side. It's hard, as I was saying. And what he was saying was exactly how we can bring anyone into this, whether it's students in higher education, people in the community, or people in the police department. Helping people act with empathy can be, in many ways, a gateway to servant leadership. Once you've opened yourself up to listening, to engaging, to truly understanding, you start to think about the ways that you apply these in other ways. Did I know what servant leadership was 5 years ago? No. I mean, I knew what leadership was. But as I came to MSOE, it's embedded across the institution. As I was working on a certificate in leadership through Lakeland, it's embedded in those courses. And those opportunities through MSOE and through Lakeland and just through my engagement on campus really helped me see, like, oh, so this is leadership, that is leadership. And I think we have to challenge ourselves to think about what is leadership, what is empathy, and correcting ourselves when we misunderstand or correcting others, and just guiding them through that process, letting them know that it's okay to be wrong because we're all human. I think that that's a key piece.
I'll just add, just because you brought up the empathy part, because I'm a huge believer in empathy. And when I teach about investigations and interrogations, that's probably, with the exception of listening, those are the two top principles I really focus on. And when you think about an interrogation, in mine especially, they did terrible, terrible things. And they might be upset, they might be crying. And what I told younger detectives is, I'm not asking you to feel sorry for them. They've done what they've done, and they're going to pay the consequences. However, if you're going to connect with this person, you're going to have empathy. You're going to have to see the world through their eyes. You're going to have to understand what they're facing, because that's their reality. And now moving forward in less of the interrogation role, also with workers, co-workers. And when I deal with a person or a group of co-workers that are upset, got to have empathy to understand their frustrations.
I'm going to share one little story. That this is a trick that I learned when I was chair for servant leadership at MSOE. And it's something that it sounds almost counterproductive to what you're asking, but it really does work. And it's something that I hope my colleagues will say that I hold true to, is our schedules get filled up so quickly, right? Especially right now, because we don't even have to walk to our next meeting. We just click a button and we're there. I had a day like that yesterday, 8 of them in a row. And, but I did something today that it just makes me think of it, is that you make a commitment to yourself that you're not going to have that meeting if you can't be 100% present. And sometimes that means canceling a meeting because you know you can't be 100% present. And I think that giving yourself the grace to be able to do that and then saying that, right? Or I'd love to meet with you right now, but I know that I would be distracted because I have this deadline. And so now is not the time. Let's schedule it at another time. As long as you explain that and you have that conversation and you make sure that you're clarifying that, it's understood. And so that's something that I've been trying very hard to practice for about 5 years, and I'm not always really great at it, but there's never been a time where somebody looks at me poorly because I haven't, been able to keep that meeting. But that's just something that seems to work.
There are 5 organizations building and planting seeds in Wisconsin right now. They didn't have them before. Bernie is one of the chief chargers in Racine. Bernie, hold your hand up. He is looking for a small group of people to come together. He's committed. Bernie also has a book that he's written about middle management that's in the process of being edited. It's very good, Bernie. I'm halfway through it. It's in the preliminary edit process. We got a screen up here. Oh man, this is really neat. There are 9 active monthly roundtable programs, 9 of them, every week. And I frequently find people who are not subscribed to our list. There was 3 out of 4 that I interviewed coming through the door that were not. And so the process is, you may be in a local group, but go sign up with the state group so you see all the options you have. One lady who was our host said, well, where do I go? I usually go here on Tuesdays, but now I'm helping out at a school. I have to go figure out where to go. And it turned out she had never been there, and I told her there's 2 Fridays in the state that you can plug into at noon. So be aware of that. Ask other people the same question. And there's something really significant going on here. I don't know if you realize it or not. I'm going to get into a little bit more. But young people are really important. People that are under 40 are going to be much more receptive. It's very likely that everyone in this room has the heart. It's a matter of stimulating it, encouraging each other, participating, and it's a nurturing process. Oak trees grow at a certain speed. It's slow. Bamboo grows much faster, maybe 5 times faster, but it doesn't hold up under a storm. Oak does. And so you're planting oak trees, and you don't know when they're going to sprout or how they're going to sprout. It's up to us to just nurture it. Have no expectations is the best thing, but I always have expectations. Tough thing. I'm still working on it. Wisconsin Testimony has 200 plus YouTube videos, clips on classes, things we've done. They're all rich. They've all been beautifully edited. And they are there for you to use in your group if you choose to. There's papers and studies, stories, all in Wisconsin. Wisconsin leadership is going through a reboot process that after the summit, it was one of the reasons we chose to do the summit. It turned out to be a little bit different than we planned. And out of that came a group that was highly interested. There are people in this room that are part of that group. And we have come together, and I will show you, I think, that we have what we're doing over 1 year, 1 to 3, 3 to 5. Okay. These new roundtables, Appleton has gone public, so they're available. That's in person. Green Bay, Madison, Racine, an association of 600 towns and villages are all engaged in proceeding. I mean, in the next 60 days, something should happen with all of those, except for maybe Green Bay. Here are the plans. This is the foresight. So 1 to 3 years, we will be doing, the champions for that are Tom, Jerry, and Deanna. The 1 year program is, number 4 there, is completed. And I don't know, is that on the website now, Sherry? So you'd be amazed at how much we have in Wisconsin that is going on with servant leadership in all the institutions. I can't figure out how to disseminate it. There's so much, but it's there. It's all together, and it's linked up. Researchers can use it. People going to different cities can use it. It is on the website, likely under resources. It's pages and pages, typewritten pages of what's going on all over the state. Much more than we'd give credit to ourselves, but we certainly should celebrate it. Right now, we're working on the social media, our platform, and what happens behind the scenes, the consistency of that, the way in which we advertise this, and what we say and what we do. We're trying to figure out what people are attracted to. And there's two things they're attracted to. One is community building, and the other one is roundtables, interestingly enough. So we know that. Now we're trying to shape up the back end of the website. Then we will take a look at making this all work, that's about where we are now. And then after that, we will use that to rebuild the website and decide how it should be structured. And I would say it's 70% done, 50% for sure. I'm qualifying it with my optimism. Viterbo is having a statewide annual conference. Tom, which is one of the people, I should explain, the group that came together September 22nd, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us were there? 6? Okay. Yeah. Okay, there's 6 of us in the room that were there. And the people that went were the ones that 30 or more people were invited, based on the recommendations of everyone, to do a SWOT analysis. And if you did a SWOT analysis, you were eligible to go to the meeting. The meeting was in Fond du Lac, started at 12 o'clock and began at 1. And by the time 5 o'clock rolled around, we developed all of this, and people put their name down what they're going to work on. And that's what we're doing. And they will have a reboot this September, might be the 21st or the 22nd. They're kind of set aside, and we'll see how we did. And we definitely have made progress the first year. I don't know if we'll complete it, but it looks pretty darn good. Year 1 and 3, partnerships are a big deal. The tools, we want a 50% increase in attendance, or it could be participation. Either one could be the way of measuring this 3 to 5 years out. Lacrosse, Fond du Lac, Madison, Northeast Wisconsin is what the group in Appleton called themselves. Racine, Northeast Madison are gathering people now. The board of the Villages and Communities Association has approved this for their group to begin roundtables, and it's up to the CEO to do it. The CEO came up with the idea. He's a part of our group also. So in Milwaukee, we have west, north, south, central, downtown available in Milwaukee. Anybody that wants to can start one. The Mequon Nature Center has said, yep, we'll have one here, but you need a small group of people that come together, and they would likely be on a different day, because we already have one within miles of that, probably 5 miles. But it's small groups, so if anybody wants to get together and do something in that area, they are interested in hosting it. Here is something very interesting. These are all the things that are international that you can listen to. But in 0.83 seconds, the term servant-leadership has 137 million articles, books, or discussions. I will tell you 3 years ago, that was 0, maybe 4. And servant leader went from 13 million to 53 million in about 18 months, but it stayed there, and this took over. And the whole issue here is, how do we speak to servant leadership? How do you represent it to someone? There are people that go toxic because they think it's a faith-based. It's a manipulation of people. And so you want to avoid that. Toxicity can do a lot in a short-term basis. So what do you say when you describe what you're doing? Well, we listen, we learn how to listen, and the body of knowledge is servant-leadership, and we separate it because it's servant is one operation and leadership is the other part. And that's why we have the dash. You have to decide how you want to do it. You know right now, I've just told you, that the community of people that are interested in this are interested in its effect on community and participating or something with roundtables. They're interested in roundtables. So you'll see that being emphasized after this and likely after Tom's event. These others, lead by serving, that was the hot button 3-4 years ago. And that stayed still. Applied ethics hasn't moved. That was a big one 5 years ago. Wisconsin State Servant Leadership, that's a new one. I don't have data on it. Background. These are areas for research that you can grab. Most of this is on the website.
Hospitality comes from the Greek word hospice, which means make space for the guest. Hospitality is the oasis from hostility. So making space for the guests, particularly the strangers in our lives. Well, we saw that happening in terms of the good work that Josh is doing and Becky is doing and the good work that Jim is doing. They make space in their lives in order to other people can remain human. How important and critical that is. And then we had that wonderful lunch. 3 different kinds of sandwiches. Kettle cooked chips, chocolate chip cookies. Good veggie sandwiches. And just remind us for just a moment. The water you had on your table, people in Ukraine will not get that much clean water today. The sandwiches that we enjoyed, the animals and the vegetables were raised by farmers who are getting ready to go out in their fields and out in their barns, not knowing what their prices are going to be. The price of corn is astronomical. The price of nitrogen for fertilizers is unbelievable. And then the price of fuel. I work with the farmers a great deal, and they're very much worried about this season coming. But everything that we eat is because of the humble service of other people. And how about the wonderful staff who made those sandwiches and packed them and then labeled them? Generally, when I was looking for a sandwich, you have to kind of pick up the bread on each one. What's there? And there it was, all labeled, organized. And then after we leave today, they'll pick it up and they'll clean it all up again. Our lives are predicated in the humble service of other people wherever we go. Let us never take them for granted. Secondly, when we look in terms of our agenda, find more connections. Well, people we're reaching out to each other. We know each other by our first names, the ideas that we share, and each of us in our conversations revealed a bit of our character in terms of who we are. What do we expect, and how do we use the community? Well, we look at terms of the gifts and the resources, and Mariah said that very well. We need to know when to push and when to step back, when to be on a dance floor and when to observe. That's really the level of discernment, finding what's happening in our community. Police officers, build trust with the community and have the community trust us. Let's find ways in which Jim is out in the community talking about his empathy and compassion for the people that he serves in the community, even people that he might not like. He serves dignity each and every day. That's moral courage, my friend. Energy from the group, holy smokes, different perspectives. I think we got that. A refresher, you never get there. We're always learning. The other part of it is, I tell people I'm not new, innovative, or creative. I think that we got too much, we are too much enamored by what is new. I'm interested in what's true. And what's true is that people grow when they're served. Okay, now, successes from each other. Look at the successes that are taking place, the things that we're all doing in our different areas. Ignite the need for community and reconnecting. After COVID, this is going to be our challenge. How do we reconnect, restore, and renew relationships? I'll get into this moment. Bring us back to center, sense of peace, new people that have come into our lives, other perspectives. And then we went on and look at what we learned. Now, 3 things I'd like to emphasize. 1, we build our lives, we build our communities, we build our workshop, our democracy in our communities by the conversations that we have, the ways in which we talk to and with each other. Confucius, 2,500 years ago, said this: the rectification of a society begins with the reclamation of language. The way in which you talk to and with each other restores relationships. That's why your work is so significant and important, because you're looking not only for a conviction, you're looking for reconciliation. Second, what really becomes important about our conversations, it means that we turn towards each other, and oftentimes turn towards each other we might not agree with. This is what real leadership is, rather than levels of aversion. Aversion is to turn away from each other. And what we did here today, even sitting at round tables, we turn towards each other. And you begin to recognize how important that is in changing our lives. Second, a lot of talk about listening. Listen has the same letters as the word silent. Listen has the same letters as the word silent. We will not become better listeners until we limit our access to these things. These were created for distraction. Who would have thought of the word dumb scrolling? Looking for things that you can't afford and you don't want. One of the greatest temptations of every leader right now is distraction. Isn't it amazing? We even have a term now for it called distracted driving. Isn't that extraordinary? To limit your access to technology. I know this sounds countercultural, but you have to be a contemplative in order to be a servant leader. That means you have to be able to be quiet, be comfortable with silence and solitude. The opposite of contemplation is reaction. Haven't we seen too much overreaction these last 2 years? And finally, a little plug for Viterbo here. We're hosting our conference back in person. It's going to be June 30th and July 1st in La Crosse. Bernie is going to be speaking at the conference. He'll be talking about his new book, Servant Leadership from the Middle, his management. This man is so incredible that he has the cover of his book tattooed on his arm. His publisher has never seen such that kind of promotion ever. Way to go, Bernie. Mariah Weddle, who's in the back, will be speaking at our conference. She spoke at Lutheran College and just as articulate, thoughtful. She is not only an emerging leader, she's there. And she'll be speaking at our conference. Michael Bush is going to talk about best places in America to work. We have a guy from Chicago named James Bowie, a photojournalist who worked for the AP and has gone around the world covering wars. What's kept us surprised in the last 44 days is those photojournalists. And he has a marvelous program called When Home Won't Let You Stay, where he spent time talking with refugees and their stories. That level of building empathetic imaginations for how other people suffer. So that it'll be our conference in La Crosse. Our last time we had it in person, we had about 300 people. I have postcards for you there. There's an early bird sign up. We also launched an online certificate in servant leadership, and within 3 weeks, 31 people signed up. And it goes to what Dick has said. It's really now becoming popular. One of the things that Greenleaf worried about was servant leadership becoming popular, because once an idea becomes popular, it loses power. You have to continue to struggle with it and kind of unpack it, if you will. And then finally, service is love made visible. Service is love made visible. And during this week, the holiest weeks of the year, we're reminded that washing feet and feeding people and doing tasks that other people might think to be beneath themselves is our work to do. If service is beneath you, leadership is beyond you. So it is a privilege and a gift to be able to serve, a privilege and a gift to be able to meet and to remind ourselves of who and whose we are.